Hello, everyone. My name is Abilash Gunta. I'm a senior manager of data engineering at ArcticWolf. And today in my talk, I want to talk to you about what we do at ArcticWolf to manage Databricks permissions at scale and a few practical patterns that you can take home and implement in your own environments. I've been working in the cybersecurity field for over 17 years. Initially, I did a lot of work with traditional OLTP databases like SQL Server and so on. And later on, I moved to cloud-based data workloads. And in the last 5 years, I've been doing a lot of work in the data engineering space, especially building solutions on Databricks. Here's my plan for today's talk. First, we'll look at Arctic Wolf's Databricks journey and where we are currently. And we'll look at and also why data governance is important to us, to what we do. And we'll look at Unity Catalog and what it means, and because that's the foundation upon which all our patterns are built upon. And then we'll look at a few examples. The first one is a simple environment that is that can be solved with a simple solution I call the first pattern. And then we'll look at a realistic production environment that can be very complex. We solve this using the second pattern using centralized single sign-on and push groups. We'll talk more about that soon. And finally, between these two patterns, organically, a new hybrid pattern will emerge, which also uses the Databricks apps, which is very cool. We'll look at that in the demo. And then in the end, we'll draw some conclusions and wrap this up. Right. Firstly, the Databricks journey. Let me make myself a little smaller here. Arctic Wolf is a cybersecurity company. We ingest more than 8 trillion events every week, security events, and we ingest this from all our customers. We have more than 10,000 customers, small, medium, large enterprises, right? And we ingest all this data into a data lake that powers both our internal analysts who work with this threat data and solve cybersecurity challenges. But we also enable our customers to sift through their data that we host. So we recently released a feature called Data Explorer that enables this, and Data Lake that we built on Databricks is the backbone of that. And also in the recent few months, we've used liquid clustering feature of Databricks to deliver this data lake, data explorer feature at a very high performance. Now customers can search up to 90 days of data from milliseconds to seconds. Because of all this data that we are collecting and storing and hosting and serving to our customers, data governance is really, really important to us. And we went through all the challenges, and this is what we have done so far. We'll go through all the patterns. Okay, which brings us to Unity Catalog. Unity Catalog, to level set for those of you who may not be aware too much of this feature, but this is the core of what Databricks provides in terms of data governance. This forms a unified governance layer. You manage all your assets, including tables, views, and your object storage or your AI or ML models. All of these assets you can manage using Unity Catalog. And Unity Catalog also provides features like fine-grained security governance, fine-grained security control, so that you only give the required necessary permissions to users instead of broader permissions, right? And UC also does this across all the workspaces in a Databricks account. So that's a very handy feature. And then remember, this is a region scoped metastore. So if typically in one region you have one metastore, and Unity Catalog gives you tools to have data discovery across all the workspaces using that region, right? In practice, Unity Catalog looks like this. You go to UC in your Databricks workspace, it lists all your catalogs and schemas and tables, and you can grant your privileges or permissions at each level. You can grant them at a catalog level or a schema level like I'm showing here. Right. With this understood, let's look at a simple environment. You have one Databricks account and a few workspaces in it. How do you manage permissions? The first thing as a Databricks admin, what you do typically is you go to your accounts console and you enable SSO authentication and work with your IDP team. right? A lot of people use Okta, so I'll take Okta as an example. So you set up SSO for authentication, single sign-on with Okta. And after you do that, this is how the user accesses the Databricks, right? The user goes to the Okta dashboard inside your enterprise. It'll have a Databricks tile. They click on it, and that does the single sign-on authentication and redirects them to the workspace, right? Simple. But to do that, to get to this point, the first pattern looks like this, right? This is what you need to set up. On the far left, you see an IT request process. So you work with your IT team to set up a request or a ticketing process where users can request access to Databricks. That ticket goes through an approval flow. Once approvals are done, this box you see in the middle is happening on the Okta side. What Okta does is it does a user identity push to Databricks, meaning it'll create a user inside Databricks account with that email address, and it ties it back to the Okta identity of that user. So in the future, if that user ever leaves the company, the deprovisioning automatically happens from the Okta side, right? You don't have to worry about that. One less problem to worry about, and it's so simple, right? So once you set this up, user gets access to the Databricks account, user clicks on the Okta tile and does SSO login. What do we see? What do we see? You see this error. A lot of you might have seen this error before because remember, you have authentication enabled, but you don't have access to any workspaces yet, right? Because if you go back, in our case, the workspaces, we have three workspaces: telemetry, audit, and intelligence. These workspaces are managed by the access to those workspaces are managed by three groups here: telemetry users and so on. So to get our user access to telemetry workspace, all we have to do is add them to the telemetry users group, right? Right now I listed here, you can do this manually because these are internal groups to Databricks, right? This is not managed by anyone else. These are internal groups that you can create through Terraform, or maybe you want to create just manually, but you can achieve this goal of getting the user access by adding them to the group. After you add them to the group, before he or she would see an error like this, and after you add them to the group, these errors go away, and they get presented with a list of choices, all the workspaces they have access to, and they can select one and log into that, right? Problem solved. This is the first pattern. Now, let's raise the stakes. Imagine you have 4 Databricks accounts. This is very realistic. In this example, I gave an example. In this example, I'm showing one Databricks account per region. This is a very common thing that happens, or maybe you have a different Databricks account for a different use case, right? But no matter, you have 4 Databricks accounts and multiple workspaces in each, what should be the setup? If you're thinking, you can just do the same, right? It was working before. Just because you have more groups, wouldn't not work? Well, technically it does work because it's the same pattern, right? Uh, it'll still work. The blue box here is not a big problem because especially if the Okta team has automated that, like once approval is done, if that kicks off an automation of pushing that user identity to Databricks account. If that's automated, then it'll happen 4 times or n number of times to each account. That's easy, right? But the problem happens in the managing your internal groups area, right? Now you have to go into each account because remember, the groups are managed at an account level, right? And you have multiple accounts, you have to go to each account, manage the group, modify the group, add the user, all of that, right? If 5 users want access to 3 workspaces in 4 accounts, you can imagine this becomes a big multiplication problem, right? Lots of additions. So to avoid this and to solve this challenge, we introduce the second pattern, right? This is very similar. It builds upon the first pattern. The user identity, excuse me, the user identity push happens still, but here I'm calling it an assignment group. So when a user requests access to a workspace in an account, they will be first added. Step one is add them to the assignment group for that account, right? So that action pushes them to that account. The user gets created. Now the magic happens here, where we now introduce a concept called push groups. And this is done using something called SCIM, right? Databricks Unity Catalog supports SCIM APIs. So you can set up SCIM between Okta and Databricks. Here, what we have done is we have three workspaces: telemetry, audit, intel, right? So for these three workspaces, we create three groups on the Okta side. That's the tricky part. We're not creating in Databricks yet. We're creating on the Okta side. And Okta will push all these three groups into Databricks, right? And we even have these groups have the word Okta in it, just to be clear that it was created by Okta. And because Okta automatically pushes and syncs these groups and the users inside each of these groups, now something great happened. The adding of the user to the group is not a Databricks problem anymore. It's happening outside of Databricks at an Okta level, at an enterprise level, right? And now that these groups have appeared in Databricks, we can do our permission management with it. We can simply add them to the respective workspaces. Or, like I'm doing here, we can add them, we can have an abstraction layer. We can add these Okta groups as a child group of a parent group that you have created internally, right? Maybe here I'm calling it Terraform telemetry users, right? And then we enable access to that workspace for this group, right? Just because the blue Okta groups are part of this, they automatically get access as well. So what we've done is you're automating the groups push from Okta to Databricks. Because you're doing this, you're you're pushing one group to each Databricks account, and you're not repeating yourself. And also to remember, once this Okta group is created in Databricks, if we go back to the previous slide, you can do whatever you want with it. You don't just have to enable access to the workspace. Maybe it's a dev account and a dev workspace, and you want that group to give admin level permissions to that workspace. I don't recommend it, but maybe if you want to do that, you can do that now. But some of you might already be thinking, but this is just a workspace enablement. But many of you know, once you log into a workspace, there's all these assets. Remember the screenshot from the UC slide? All these assets are not managed by a workspace group. Each asset has its own group sometimes, right? Like in this example, we're showing you a bunch of schemas under the telemetry catalog, and all these groups that look like telemetry readers or writers or agents readers, these all manage permissions to who can access those assets, right? We can solve this using the same pattern again, right? The only change is instead of pushing just the workspace enablement groups, again, just to step back, all these groups are just groups, right? They're just groups from Databricks point of view or Okta point of view, but I'm calling them push groups before, and I'm calling them catalog groups now, just to avoid confusion when talking about it. And now, let's say you want three catalog groups. The same thing you do, you set up three of those catalog sounding groups on the Okta side, and then the sync happens. And once those groups show up in Databricks, you can enable them access to specific catalogs, like these blue arrows indicate here, right? It's the same as before. You just have more groups coming from Okta, right? In the previous diagram, the black lines were indicating the push groups, the workspace groups. The blue lines were indicating the catalog groups. Does this work? Yes, it works. The only problem is, what if you don't want so many groups coming from a different system like Okta, right? It's a good thing based on what we've seen so far, but maybe, and these are real practical problems, maybe the IT team does not like this pattern because they manage governance for the whole of the enterprise. Maybe they don't like this pattern of creating hundreds of groups. Maybe that's not the pattern, that's not the design they prefer. Maybe they just want to create one group per one team, right? That's very common. Or the turnaround time is too slow. Remember, every time you need to set up a new catalog group or a new bunch of catalog groups, IT has to do some work, right? Because the group has to be created on the Okta side. And we are not Okta admins, we are not IT team. So that adds some turnaround time. So what's the problem? We still want integration with Okta, but we also want some flexibility. How do we solve this? That's when Databricks apps come to help you. Let me explain. This is what I call the hybrid pattern, right? Now, instead of having all these catalog groups coming from Okta pushed down to Databricks, because of all these problems we have seen just now, the turnaround time and all of that, we don't do that. Instead, we create a simple Databricks app, call it the Access Portal, and manage your adding of the users to catalog groups, manage that functionality, that operations in that app, right? And uh, because you're building this portal within Databricks, you can also do an approval flow. Maybe this approval happens within the data team, or maybe we send it to individual catalog owners, depending on the catalog that the user is asking permission for. And also, best of all, because the user already has access to the account, remember, they already have access to the account. They already possibly have access to workspaces. They only don't have access to specific catalog groups, right? Because they're in the system, they can easily access Databricks app because Databricks app comes with inbuilt governance, right? And the change here is you still set up the Databricks groups. That's not really a change, but here I'm calling this internal in the name because it's not coming from Okta or anywhere like that. It's internal, and the updating of these internal groups is managed through Databricks app. This is the app that we have set up in our company, right? It's a simple app. It has a request access page. Once you go in there, it lists you all the groups here, and we can in the app we can of course design what catalog, what groups to show. Maybe we don't want to show the workspace enablement groups to avoid confusion, so we just show the catalog group. So we decide that, and then they can select one or more groups to join, give a good reason, and submit it. It goes and sits in a approval queue. That's this button for the admins. They go there and approve it. Once that approval is done, because the app has access to the API, it can go and update the groups. That's it. Just review what we've just done. We have still set up the catalog groups using your IAC, Terraform, whatnot. You still manage the permissions for those groups to the catalogs and the assets using Unity Catalog, again done through IAC. Most likely, no changes so far. But the adding users to groups, this is done via the Access Portal. And why Databricks apps, I just explained, because the main reason it has inbuilt governance, but it's also very easy to set up and flexible. And you might question, are we overcomplicating this whole thing? It depends on what you want, and it depends on your environment and the number of users and what your IT team is thinking, all of those things, right? So both are right solution. The second pattern and the hybrid pattern is just different, depends on the choice. At this point in the talk, I'll do a demo. We have built this for real inside ArcticWolf, so I will go through a live demo, most likely, or we can even do a recording. And then going to the conclusions, just to review, the first pattern is very simple. You integrate with Okta. You still manage all the groups manually. the benefit you get is you get single sign-on, and you also get that automatic user management from Okta, right? From centralized governance. The second pattern is a little complex, but it's still very neat because it's very logical, right? You can always go to Okta or Databricks and see who has access and who has access to what groups. You can review it, you can audit it, and all the good things that come with that. You integrate with Okta, you push user identities and groups. You push both workspace groups and catalog groups, right? And the hybrid pattern, the one that we looked at the end, it provides more flexibility, more control within the data teams. We still have the integration with Okta for users. We still have the workspace groups. The initial problems are all solved. But for catalogs, we have our own Databricks app to do it faster than depending on the central teams. Right. That was my talk. Thank you so much.